And David Smith will tell us how right now.
The Bible tells us to be ready always to give an answer to every man that would ask us for the reason of the hope that is within us, and to do it with meekness and with fear. 1 Peter 3, verse 15. Hi, I'm David Smith, and this is Be Ready Always. You know, from time to time, we address subjects in this segment, and we get viewer response. And sometimes certain subject matter is prone to more viewer response than others, and perhaps none more so than issues of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. We can understand that when we deal with matters of marriage, divorce, and remarriage, we're talking about very emotional issues where there are family ties and strong relationships that are connected. And so it can be, from the human perspective, a confusing subject. But God is very clear in those matters. From time to time, people ask about a statement Paul makes in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In verse 15 of that chapter, Paul says this, "But if an unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace." And we've received several questions from viewers where people ask this question, isn't Paul really saying that there's another reason for marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or divorce and remarriage, besides what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9, where there it says, "Except it be for fornication"? Isn't Paul really saying that for an issue of a believer and an unbeliever being together, isn't that also a reason that a person could divorce a spouse and be married to another? Let's take a look again at this passage so that the next time it comes up, we can be ready to give an answer. Here's the first thing we want to do. We want to actually drop back a few verses to verse 11. If we have a pen or a pencil ready, let's do this in verse 11. Paul says, "But even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be," and here's the phrase we want to underline, "be reconciled to her husband." Especially notice that last part, to her husband. And then of course Paul reverses it and says at the end, "And a husband is not to divorce his wife." In this passage, Paul is only considering a matter of separation, not real divorce for fornication, because here in this passage, even though there may be some separation between the two, Paul still says that that man and that woman are together because she can either remain by herself or she can be reconciled to her husband. She still has a husband. We'll also notice, if we drop down to verse 15, really the verse in question, in the same context, Paul says if the unbeliever departs, then the brother or the sister, the Christian, is not under bondage in such cases. Now, the kind of bondage that's under consideration here is like a slavery. And what Paul is saying is that if an unbeliever departs in some strenuous time because of the believer's faith, the believer is not in a type of slavery as such that would cause him or her to have to leave Jesus Christ to follow that spouse, to remain in that marriage. And that's what Paul is saying. He's not saying there's a reason for divorce. He's simply saying that we must remain faithful to Jesus Christ. Is this passage teaching another cause for divorce and remarriage? No. Paul's just simply addressing the issue of stressful times that may occur because of political or cultural conditions, especially because somebody may be faithful to the Lord and it causes some additional stress on the relationship because of the unbeliever, but it's not a cause for divorce and remarriage. Let's do this. Underneath or out beside verse 15 somewhere in our Bibles, let's write the verses 1 Peter 3, verses 1 through 5. Now there's a reason we do that. In those passages, in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, here's what Peter says. He says that if a person has an unbelieving spouse, rather than leave that person, we are supposed to try to convert that person by a godly lifestyle. So it would be in conflict with what Peter said, and it would be in conflict with what Jesus says was the only exception for divorce and remarriage in Matthew chapter 19:9, if Paul is now saying there's another reason that somebody might be able to divorce and remarry. Paul is simply saying in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 15 that we are not under the kind of bondage that would cause us to leave Jesus Christ to follow someone else. Instead, what we ought to try to do is be faithful and convert the unbelieving spouse. Hopefully this helps so that the next time it comes up in conversation, we will be ready to give an answer. I'm David Smith, and this is Be Ready Always.